The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Maria rolled out of bed, her body aching from yesterday's double shift. She tiptoed past her daughter's room, careful not to wake little Sophia, who was still sleeping peacefully with her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. In the tiny kitchen of their small apartment, Maria made herself a cup of instant coffee. The steam rose from the mug as she stared out the window at the city slowly waking up. Cars were already moving down the street, people rushing to their jobs, everyone chasing their own version of survival. Maria was 28 years old, but sometimes she felt much older. Life had a way of adding years when you weren't looking. She had dreams once, big, beautiful dreams that filled her head with music and possibility. She used to sit for hours at the piano in her high school music room, her fingers dancing, across the keys like they were telling stories only she could understand. Back then, her music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, would always tell her she had something special. "Maria," she would say with genuine excitement in her voice, "you don't just play the piano, you speak through it." Those words used to give her butterflies, the good kind that made her believe anything was possible. After high school, Maria had enrolled in the community college's music program. She was going to study classical piano, maybe even transfer to a bigger school later. The plan seemed perfect, until life decided to write its own melody. Sophia came into the world when Maria was 21, a beautiful surprise that changed everything overnight. Suddenly there were diapers to buy, doctor visits to pay for, and a tiny human depending on her for everything. The music classes became impossible to afford, both in time and money. One by one, Maria had to let go of her classes until she finally dropped out completely. That's how she ended up at Cafe Harmony, a cozy little restaurant downtown that still carried the charm of old times. The building used to be a music hall back in the 1920s, and you could still feel that history in its bones. The high ceilings, the vintage wallpaper, and especially the grand piano that sat in the corner like a sleeping giant. Mr. Chen, the cafe owner, was a kind man who understood that everyone had a story. He never asked too many questions about Maria's past, just appreciated that she worked hard and treated customers with genuine warmth. The job paid enough to cover rent and groceries, with a little left over for Sophia's school supplies and occasional treats. Every day, Maria would walk past that piano. Sometimes, when she was wiping down tables nearby, her fingers would unconsciously move as if they were playing invisible keys. The muscle memory was still there, buried, but not forgotten. The piano was supposedly just decoration now, Mr. Chen had explained when she first started working there. It hadn't been played properly in years. But late at night, after Sophia was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Maria would sit at her old upright piano, a garage sale find that was missing 3 keys and had a sticky pedal. She would play, softly, very softly, pouring her heart into melodies that only the walls could hear. In those moments, she wasn't just a waitress trying to make ends meet. She was still the girl who could speak through music, even if no one was listening anymore. Friday evenings at Cafe Harmony were always special, but this particular Friday had an extra buzz in the air. It was the monthly Artists' Night, an event that Mr. Chen had started 2 years ago to bring the community together and give local talent a chance to shine. The cafe transformed on these nights. The regular fluorescent lights were dimmed, replaced by warm amber bulbs that made everything glow like honey. Candles flickered on each table, and the usual chatter of dinner conversation, mixed with an excitement that you could practically taste. Maria had worked every artist's night since she started at the cafe. She enjoyed these evenings, even though they meant running around more than usual. People dressed up a little nicer, tipped a little better, and seemed genuinely happy to be there. Tonight, they were expecting about 30 guests, all coming, specifically to hear David Kumar, a local jazz musician who had been playing these monthly shows for almost a year. The evening started normally enough. Maria was busy taking drink orders and explaining the special menu to a table of regulars when she noticed Mr. Chen pacing near the front counter, his phone pressed tight against his ear. His usually calm face looked worried, and he kept checking his watch every few seconds. "What's wrong, boss?" asked Jenny, the other waitress working that night. She was young, maybe 19, and still had that energy that comes from believing everything will work out fine. Mr. Chen hung up his phone and ran his hands through his graying hair. "David is sick," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Food poisoning. He can't make it tonight." The words hit the room like a stone dropped in still water. Jenny's eyes went wide, and Maria felt her stomach drop. She looked around the cafe at all the people who had come specifically for the music. There was the elderly couple who came every month and always requested jazz standards. The group of college students who had probably saved up their coffee money to afford dinner. Here, the young mother who had clearly arranged a babysitter for a rare night out. Mr. Chen started making phone calls, desperately trying to find another musician on such short notice. But it was Friday evening. Any decent performer was probably already booked somewhere else. With each failed call, his shoulders seemed to sink a little lower. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Chen finally announced to the room, his voice apologetic, "I'm afraid our pianist for tonight has fallen ill. We're working on finding a replacement, but in the meantime, please enjoy your meals and dessert will be complimentary for everyone." The disappointment was visible on people's faces. Some smiled politely and said they understood, but Maria could see it in their eyes. They had been looking forward to this. A few tables even asked for their checks early, deciding to head somewhere else for the evening. Maria felt something stirring in her chest as she watched the scene unfold. It was a familiar feeling, one she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was the same feeling she used to get when she heard a beautiful piece of music or when her fingers found just the right melody on the piano keys. It was the feeling of wanting to fix something, to make it better, to fill a silence that shouldn't exist. She found herself staring at the grand piano in the corner. Up close, she could see it was actually in beautiful condition. Someone had been taking care of it even if no one played it anymore. The black surface was polished to a shine, and when she looked closer, she could see her own reflection staring back at her. Her hands, still holding a coffee pot from her last table service, began to shake slightly. In her mind, she could hear her old music teacher's voice. "Maria, you don't just play the piano, you speak through it." But that was a long time ago. These people didn't know her as anything other than the quiet waitress who remembered their usual orders and always had a kind word. What would they think? What if she had forgotten how to play? What if her years away from proper practice had made her rusty? What if she embarrassed herself in front of everyone? Yet as she watched more people asking for their checks, as she saw the genuine sadness on Mr. Chen's face, something inside her began to grow stronger than her fears. These people had come here for music, for that special feeling that only live performance can give. Maybe, just maybe, she could give that to them. Maria's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She stood frozen by the coffee station, watching Mr. Chen make another unsuccessful phone call. Her hands were shaking now, not from the cold or from being tired, but from something much deeper, a mixture of fear and excitement that she hadn't felt in years. "Think about it logically," she told herself silently. "You're a waitress. These people don't know you can play. What if you mess up? What if you freeze? What if the piano sounds awful because no one's played it properly in so long?" But another voice in her head, quieter but more persistent, kept whispering back, "What if you don't try? What if you let this moment pass and regret it forever?" She looked around the cafe again. The elderly couple was still there, holding hands across their table, clearly hoping the evening could still be saved. The college students were laughing about something, but she could tell they were disappointed. The young mother was checking her phone, probably calculating how much time she had left before she needed to get back to her own children. Maria set down the coffee pot with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. She took a deep breath, the kind her old piano teacher used to make her take before a recital. "Breathe from your belly, Maria. Let the nerves turn into energy." Before she could talk herself out of it, she walked over to where Mr. Chen was standing. He was just hanging up from another failed call, looking more defeated than she had ever seen him. "Mr. Chen?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He looked up, distracted. "Yes, Maria. If you need to leave early because of this mess, I understand. I can handle the rest of the evening with Jenny. Actually, she said, her voice getting a little stronger, I was wondering, I know this might sound crazy, but… She paused, took another deep breath. I can play piano. Mr. Chen blinked at her like he hadn't heard correctly. I'm sorry, what? I can play piano, she repeated, this time more clearly. I studied music in college before life happened. I know it's not the same as having a real professional musician, but if you want, I could try to play something. Just until the evening is over. For a moment, Mr. Chen just stared at her. Maria could practically see the thoughts racing through his mind. She was his waitress, the quiet one who did her job well and never caused any trouble. Piano? Really? Maria, he said slowly. Are you sure? That's very kind of you to offer, but playing for a room full of people is different than playing at home. And that piano hasn't been tuned in months. I know, she said quickly. I know it's risky, but people are leaving, and everyone looks so disappointed. Maybe it's worth a try. Jenny had overheard their conversation and came over, her eyes wide with curiosity. Wait, Maria, you play piano? How did I not know this? We've worked together for like 8 months. Maria felt her cheeks get warm. It's not something I really talk about. It's been a while since I played for anyone except myself. Mr. Chen looked around the cafe, then back at Maria. She could see him weighing his options. Keep disappointing his customers or take a chance on his waitress who claimed she could play piano. Okay, he said finally, though his voice was uncertain. If you really think you can do this, then let's try it. The moment he said yes, Maria felt like she might throw up. What had she just gotten herself into? She hadn't played for an audience since her college recitals, and that was years ago. Her palms were sweating and she suddenly couldn't remember how to breathe properly. But she had offered and Mr. Chen had said yes, and now there was no backing out. I need to take off my apron, she said, her voice shaky again. Of course, Mr. Chen nodded. Take all the time you need. Maria walked to the back room where employees kept their personal things. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely untie her apron strings. In the small mirror above the sink, she looked at herself. Hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, minimal makeup, the uniform she wore every day. This wasn't how she had ever imagined returning to performing. But maybe that was okay. Maybe this wasn't about looking like a concert pianist. Maybe it was just about sharing something beautiful with people who needed it. She took one more deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked back out into the cafe. As she approached the piano, she noticed that conversations were getting quieter. People were starting to realize something was happening. The walk from the back room to the piano felt like it took forever. Maria was aware of every step, every eye that turned to follow her movement. The cafe, which had been buzzing with disappointed conversations just moments before, began to grow. Quiet as people realized their waitress was heading toward the beautiful grand piano in the corner. She could hear whispered questions. Is she going to play? Does Maria know how to play piano? I had no idea. When she reached the piano bench, Maria's legs felt like they might give out. The piano suddenly seemed enormous, much bigger than her little upright at home. The keys looked pristine and intimidating. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her fingers didn't remember what to do? She sat down slowly, adjusting the bench to the right height. The action felt automatic, muscle memory from years of piano lessons and practice sessions. She placed her hands in her lap and looked out at the room. Every single person was watching her now, waiting to see what would happen. Mr. Chen stood near the counter, his expression a mixture of hope and worry. Jenny was holding a tray of drinks, completely frozen in place. The elderly couple at table 6 leaned forward in their chairs. Even the college students had stopped their conversation mid-sentence. Maria closed her eyes for just a moment and tried to remember why she was doing this. Not for herself, not to prove anything, but because these people had come here hoping to hear music. They deserved something beautiful. She lifted her hands to the keys and gently pressed down on middle C. The sound was pure and clear, much better than she had expected. The piano had been maintained well, even if it hadn't been played regularly. She played a simple scale just to get the feel of the instrument, and was pleasantly surprised by how responsive it was. Then, without announcing what she was going to play, Maria began Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a piece she had learned years ago, one that had always made her feel like she was painting with sound instead of colors. Her fingers found the melody easily, as if they had been waiting all these years for this moment. The first few notes floated through the cafe like a gentle breeze. Maria felt the familiar magic of playing begin to take over. Her nervousness started to melt away as the music filled the space. This was what she had missed. Not just playing the piano, but sharing music with others, creating something beautiful that could touch people's hearts. As she moved into the more complex middle section of the piece, Maria could feel the room change around her. The energy shifted from curious anticipation to genuine amazement. People stopped moving entirely. She heard someone quietly gasp when she executed a particularly delicate passage. When the nocturne ended, there was complete silence for about 3 seconds. Then the applause started. Not polite restaurant clapping, but real enthusiastic applause. Maria opened her eyes and saw faces that looked genuinely moved. The young mother had tears in her eyes. The elderly man was shaking his head in amazement. But Maria wasn't done. Something had awakened in her, something that had been sleeping for too long. She transitioned into a jazz version of Autumn Leaves, adding her own improvisations and flourishes. She had forgotten how good it felt to let the music flow through her, to not just play the notes but to really express something. The jazz piece brought a different energy to the room. People began to sway slightly in their chairs. She could see smiles spreading across faces as the familiar melody wrapped around them like a warm blanket. For her third piece, Maria surprised even herself. She began playing an original composition she had been working on during those quiet nights at home. It was a piece about hope and dreams deferred, about finding light in unexpected places. She had never played it for anyone before. It was too personal, too much a part of her own story. But tonight felt like the right time to share it. The melody was gentle but strong, with moments of sadness that resolved into something beautiful and uplifting. As she played, Maria felt like she was finally telling her story, not with words but with music. The room was completely still. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing to listen. Maria poured everything into this piece. Her struggles as a young mother, her dreams that had been put on hold, her hope that maybe it wasn't too late for second chances. When she finished, the silence lasted even longer this time. Then the applause erupted louder than before. People were standing up, some wiping away tears. The elderly couple was applauding so enthusiastically that Maria thought they might hurt their hands. "More! More!" Someone called out from the back of the room. Maria looked around the cafe and realized something had shifted. Not just in the room, but inside herself. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The applause seemed to go on forever. Maria sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, trying to process what had just happened. The faces looking back at her were glowing with genuine appreciation and amazement. This was so different from the polite smile she usually received when serving coffee or taking meal orders. Mr. Chen was the first to approach her, and she had never seen him look so stunned. "Maria," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I had no idea. In 3 years, I had absolutely no idea you could do that." That was incredible. Jenny rushed over, practically bouncing with excitement. "How are you working as a waitress when you can play like that? I mean, no offense to waitressing, but wow." Before Maria could respond, people started coming up to her. The elderly couple introduced themselves as Frank and Helen had tears still glistening in her eyes. "Dear," Helen said, taking Maria's hands in her own, "that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. You have a true gift." The college students wanted to know if she gave lessons. The young mother asked if she performed anywhere else regularly. Person after person shared how the music had moved them, how it had made their evening special in a way they hadn't expected. But the most surprising visitor came near the end of the evening. A well-dressed woman in her 50s had been sitting, alone at a corner table, and Maria had assumed she was just another regular customer enjoying dinner. "Excuse me," the woman said as the crowd around Maria began to thin out. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. I work with the City Symphony Hall's community outreach program." Maria felt her heart skip a beat. The Symphony Hall was the most prestigious music venue in the city. "I happened to be here tonight for dinner," Rebecca continued, "and I have to tell you, your performance was extraordinary. Not just your technical skill, which is clearly excellent, but the emotion, the storytelling through your music. That's rare." She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to Maria. "We're always looking for talented musicians to work with our community programs, teaching, performing at local events, that sort of thing. Would you be interested in auditioning?" Maria stared at the card, unable to speak. This felt like a dream, the kind of dream she had stopped allowing herself to have years ago. I have a daughter," she finally managed to say. "And this job. I need this job." Rebecca smiled warmly. "Of course. I'm not suggesting you quit your day job. These would be evening and weekend opportunities, and they pay quite well. Think about it and call me when you're ready." After Rebecca left, Maria found herself alone with Mr. Chen as Jenny finished closing duties. "Maria," he said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking. What if we made this a regular thing? What if every Friday night became Maria's piano night? I bet we could fill this place every week." The idea was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. "But what about David and other musicians?" "We could rotate," Mr. Chen suggested. "But Maria, tonight I watched something special happen. People didn't just hear music, they felt something. That's not common." Over the next few weeks, word spread about the waitress at Cafe Harmony, who could play piano like magic. Maria called Rebecca Martinez and scheduled an audition. To her amazement, she was accepted into the symphony's community program. Soon she was teaching piano to children from low-income families twice a week and performing at community centers and local events. The pay was modest, but it felt like wealth to Maria because she was doing what she loved. Friday nights at Cafe Harmony became legendary in the neighborhood. People made reservations weeks in advance to hear Maria play. She kept her waitressing job, but now it felt different. She wasn't just serving food. She was part of creating an experience that brought people together. The most wonderful change was watching Sophia discover her mother's talent. 7-year-old Sophia had known her mom played piano at home, but seeing her perform for crowds of people, seeing how music could make adults cry happy tears and bring strangers together, that was magical. "Mommy," Sophia said one night after a particularly beautiful performance, "you're like a superhero but with music instead of flying." 6 months after that first Friday night performance, Maria looked around the packed cafe during one of her regular shows. Every table was full, people were smiling, and the music was flowing from her fingers like it never wanted to stop. She had learned something important that night when she first stepped up to the piano. Dreams don't have expiration dates. Sometimes, they just wait patiently for the right moment to bloom again. And sometimes, the most beautiful music comes not from perfect concert halls, but from the courage to share your gift when people need it most. The girl who used to speak through piano was finally speaking again, and the whole world was listening.